wild? When you think of German tanks from World War II, there's this image that pops into everyone's head. Massive, unstoppable metal beasts rolling across Europe, striking fear into the hearts of Allied tank crews. And sitting at the very top of that intimidating pyramid is the Tiger II, also known as the King Tiger or König Steiger. This thing was supposed to be the ultimate tank, the final word in armored warfare. But here's the thing that military history buffs don't always tell you. The Tiger II was actually kind of a disaster. Yeah, it looked amazing on paper and absolutely terrified people when they saw it. But as a practical weapon of war, it was a failure wrapped in 68 tons of over-engineered German steel. Let me take you through why this supposedly legendary tank was actually one of the biggest strategic blunders of the entire war. First, let's acknowledge why everyone got so excited about the Tiger II in the first place. When this beast rolled off the production line starting in 1944, it genuinely seemed like something from the future. The armor was absolutely ridiculous. We're talking about frontal armor that was 150 millimeters thick and sloped at aggressive angles. The turret front? A whopping 180 millimeters. This wasn't just thick. It was basically impenetrable to most Allied tank guns at normal combat ranges. Allied tank crews would pump round after round into this thing and watch their shells just bounce off like they were throwing tennis balls at a concrete wall. And then there was the gun. Oh man, the gun. The Tiger II mounted the legendary 88mm 43 L71 gun, which was essentially a scaled-up version of the already fearsome 88mm that made the Tiger Oh My such a nightmare to face. This weapon could punch through pretty much any Allied tank from ranges that seemed almost unfair. We're talking about killing shots from over 2,000 meters away, American Shermans and Soviet T-34s. They didn't stand a chance in a straight-up gunfight. The Tiger II could sit there like a sniper and pick off enemy tanks before they could even get close enough to return effective fire. So yeah, on paper, this thing was a monster. German propaganda loved it. Troops who got to crew them felt invincible. Allied intelligence reports treated it with serious respect. The hype was absolutely real and for good reason, based on its raw combat specifications. Now let's talk about reality, because reality had other plans for Germany's supertank. The first massive problem was production. The Tiger II was absurdly complicated to build. While the Soviets were cranking out T-34s like they were making toy cars and the Americans were flooding Europe with Shermans, Germany was struggling to produce just 489 Tiger IIs during the entire war. That's it. Less than 500 tanks total from January 1944 until the war ended in May 1945. For context, the Soviet Union produced over 57,000 T-34s during the war. America built nearly 50,000 Shermans. Germany made 489 Tiger IIs. Do you see the problem here? It doesn't matter how amazing your tank is if you can barely make any of them. War isn't a video game where you just need the best stats. It's about logistics, numbers, and being able to replace losses. Germany was pouring resources into these ultra-complex machines when they desperately needed quantity over quality. Every Tiger II that rolled off the production line represented resources that could have gone into building multiple Panzer IVs or STUG assault guns, vehicles that were far more practical and could actually be produced in meaningful numbers. And speaking of production, let's talk about where these things were being built. By 1944, Germany was getting absolutely hammered by Allied bombing raids. The factories producing Tiger IIs were constantly under attack. Production was disrupted repeatedly. Workers were exhausted. Materials were scarce. The entire German industrial base was crumbling, and they were trying to build the most complicated tank in the world in the middle of this chaos. It's like trying to bake a souffle while your kitchen is on fire. Here's something the German propaganda machine definitely didn't want to advertise. The Tiger II broke down constantly. And I mean constantly. This tank was so unreliable, it's almost comical if it wasn't so tragic for the crews who had to deal with it. The biggest culprit was the engine and transmission. The Tiger II weighed 68 tons, which made it one of the heaviest tanks of the entire war. But it was using a Maybach HL 230 engine that produced 700 horsepower. Now that sounds like a lot, but when you're trying to move 68 tons of tank, it's barely adequate. The engine was constantly overstressed, overheating, and breaking down. The transmission was even worse. It was a fragile piece of engineering that couldn't handle the immense weight and stress of moving this monster around. Transmissions would fail regularly, leaving these supposedly invincible tanks stranded on the side of the road. And forget about going cross-country. The Tiger II's ground pressure was terrible because of its weight. It would sink into soft ground. It couldn't cross most bridges because it was too heavy. River crossings were a nightmare. The tank was supposed to be able to ford rivers up to a certain depth, but good luck getting it to the river in the first place without it breaking down or getting stuck in mud. There are numerous accounts from the War of Tiger II's being abandoned by their crews not because they were destroyed in combat, but because they simply broke down and couldn't be repaired in the field. During the Battle of the Bulge, Germany's last major offensive in the West, Tiger II's were supposed to be the spearhead of the attack. Know what happened? Many of them broke down before they even reached the combat zone. Others ran out of fuel. Some got stuck in narrow Belgian roads and couldn't maneuver. It was a disaster. Oh, and speaking of fuel, let's talk about that particular nightmare. The Tiger II got atrocious fuel economy. We're talking about maybe 0.3 miles per gallon on roads, and even worse cross-country. This thing guzzled fuel like a fraternity brother chugs beer. And this was in 1944 to 1945, when Germany's fuel situation was absolutely desperate. The Allies had been systematically destroying German oil refineries and fuel production facilities. Germany was running on fumes, literally. They didn't have enough fuel to adequately train new pilots. They didn't have enough fuel for their trucks. And here they were fielding a tank that required massive amounts of fuel just to move a few miles. Tiger II units would often be combat-ready in terms of having working tanks and trained crews, but they couldn't do anything because they had no fuel. There are accounts of Tiger II's being positioned defensively and told specifically not to move unless absolutely necessary because every meter driven was precious fuel they couldn't replace. Imagine building this ultra-mobile, powerful tank and then having to use it as a stationary pillbox because you can't afford to drive it anywhere. It's like buying a Ferrari and only using it as a very expensive lawn ornament. Let's zoom out and look at the bigger strategic picture, because the timing of the Tiger II's introduction was possibly the worst possible moment for Germany. The Tiger II entered service in 1944. By this point, Germany was already losing the war. The Soviets had turned the tide in the east and were pushing toward Germany. The Western Allies had landed in Normandy and were fighting their way across France. Germany was being squeezed from both sides. Their industrial capacity was being destroyed. They were running out of trained crews, fuel, spare parts, and time. This was not the moment to be introducing a complicated, resource-intensive supertank. This was the moment to be focused on practical, easily produced defensive weapons. Germany needed tanks that could be built quickly, maintained easily, and fielded in large numbers to slow down the Allied advance. Instead, they were pouring resources into a tank that took forever to build, broke down constantly, and came in such small numbers that it couldn't possibly affect the strategic situation. It's a classic example of German wartime engineering going completely off the rails. They became obsessed with technical superiority and lost sight of what actually wins wars. The Soviets understood this perfectly. The T-34 wasn't the best tank in the world, but it was good enough, reliable enough, and could be produced in massive quantities. That's what matters in total war. Now, I'm not saying the Tiger II was useless in combat. When it actually made it to the battlefield in working condition, with fuel and ammunition, it could be devastating. There are accounts of single Tiger IIs holding up entire Allied columns, destroying multiple enemy tanks, and causing all kinds of problems. In a one-on-one tank duel, the Tiger II would win almost every time. But war isn't a series of one-on-one duels. The Allies adapted their tactics. They learned not to engage Tiger IIs head-on. Instead, they used air power, artillery, and infantry with anti-tank weapons. They flanked them. They bypassed them. They waited for them to break down or run out of fuel, which happened often enough that it was a viable strategy. Allied soldiers respected the Tiger II, absolutely, but they also learned it wasn't invincible. A Sherman might not be able to penetrate the front armor, but it could get around the side where the armor was much thinner. Allied fighter bombers could attack from above where the armor was weakest. Anti-tank guns could be positioned in ambush. And most importantly, the Allies had so many tanks that they could afford to trade losses. Germany couldn't. There's this persistent myth that the Tiger II had some incredible kill ratio, destroying huge numbers of Allied tanks for every Tiger II lost. While individual Tiger IIs might have achieved impressive tallies in specific engagements, the overall strategic impact was minimal. Most Tiger IIs never had the chance to live up to their potential because they were abandoned due to mechanical failure, destroyed by artillery or air attack, or simply overwhelmed by numbers. Let's talk about what it was actually like to crew one of these things, because the reality was far from the propaganda image. First, you were constantly worried about breaking down. Every strange noise from the engine or transmission could mean you were about to become a very expensive roadblock. Crews had to perform extensive maintenance constantly just to keep these things running, and even then, reliability was questionable. Second, the Tiger II was slow, really slow. Top speed was supposed to be around 41 kilometers per hour on roads, but that was theoretical. In practice, it was much slower, especially with an overstressed engine and transmission. Cross-country speed was awful. This tank couldn't retreat quickly if things went wrong. It couldn't reposition rapidly to respond to threats. It was ponderous and sluggish. Third, the turret traverse was slow, powered by a motor that was prone to failure. If the power traverse broke, crews had to manually traverse the turret, which with that huge 88-millimeter gun was extremely difficult and slow. In close quarters combat or when facing multiple threats, this was potentially fatal. Fourth, visibility was limited. Like most tanks of the era, the Tiger II had limited visibility for the crew. Combine this with slow turret traverse and slow movement, and you had a tank that could be surprisingly vulnerable in close combat situations despite its impressive armor and firepower. And finally, there was the psychological stress. You were in one of the most valuable and rare vehicles in the entire German military. The pressure to perform was immense. Plus, by late 1944 and early 1945, Allied air superiority was total. Tiger II crews were constantly at risk from air attack, and that sloped armor that was so good against tank shells, not so effective against bombs and rockets from above. So let's bring this all together. The Tiger II was hyped as the ultimate tank, the apex predator of armored warfare. And in a narrow technical sense, it was incredibly impressive. The armor protection was outstanding. The gun was phenomenal. In ideal conditions, it was a formidable weapon. But wars aren't won in ideal conditions with unlimited resources. The Tiger II was a failure because it represented everything wrong with late-war German military thinking. It was over-engineered when simplicity was needed. It was resource-intensive when resources were critically scarce. It was complicated to build when speed of production was essential. It was unreliable when reliability was paramount. It guzzled fuel when fuel was almost non-existent. Germany would have been better off building more practical vehicles, more Panzer IVs, more Stu-G assault guns, more tank destroyers, more of anything that could actually be produced in meaningful numbers and kept running long enough to make a difference. The Tiger II is a perfect example of how impressive technical achievements don't always translate to military success. It's a cautionary tale about the dangers of perfectionism in warfare, about prioritizing quality over quantity when quantity is what's actually needed, and about how even the most fearsome weapon is useless if you can't field enough of them to matter. In the end, the Tiger II was a magnificent failure. It impressed everyone who saw it, terrified Allied tank crews who faced it, and accomplished basically nothing strategically. Those 489 tanks could never have changed the outcome of the war, no matter how advanced they were. Germany lost because they were outproduced, outmaneuvered, and ultimately overwhelmed by enemies who understood that winning wars requires more than just building the best tank. It requires building enough good enough tanks. That's the real lesson of the Tiger II. It's not enough to be the best if you can't also be practical, reliable, and available in the numbers needed to make a strategic difference. The Tiger II was a technological marvel that failed to deliver when it mattered most, making it one of the most overhyped weapons of World War II. Like, share, and subscribe if you like this content. Drop some suggestions below. See you soon.